Hello, and welcome everyone to another week of Baton Sâlon, brought to you by the international management consulting firm Baton Global. My name is Jeff Kappen. I'm joined today by co-host Matthew Mitchell, and we're very excited you've decided to join us today. To any of our listeners who have begun the great fast, Ramadan Kareem, we wish you a very healthy and happy month ahead of us. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, we think of it as a modern throwback to Enlightenment-era salons, like the ones that happened in Paris or Vienna, that featured thoughtful conversation, reasoned debate, and the refinement of ideas. We hope that our salon will similarly support leaders in making critical decisions and guiding their organizations through troubled times in what we hope will be an engaging and informative discussion today. This week, we're going to add on to the series we began about a month ago on diverse perspectives on the pandemic by addressing scenarios in which organizations need to have workers and staff physically out in the world. We realized some of our earlier conversations that focused on the well-beings of employees often centered on people who are currently working from home and thinking about how distance and technology are changing the workplace. But we also realize this is not the case for every organization. Many need to guarantee the physical safety both of their employees and of the communities they go out to serve, which adds another layer of complexity that demands thoughtful consideration in managing their vital work during the crisis. As always, we hope to have an interactive and engaging discussion with all of you today. Please feel free to post questions in the chat down below while we're talking here at the beginning, and we'll make sure we address as many of them as we can. So to get us started today, I will now pass the baton, as we like to say, to Matthew to introduce today's guest.
Jeff, thank you very much. I am so excited to be able to introduce one of my good friends and colleagues, Trevor Meers. Always entertaining, thoughtful, and a leader in any field that he chooses. He's a storyteller, brand builder, connector. My passion, he says, is connecting the dots between audiences and the services and messages I know they're looking for. He's led content marketing programs for public and private sector clients in multiple industries, including media, technology, tourism, and residential and commercial construction, which we're going to be featuring today. Today, he's proud to help the Midwest of tomorrow by leading branding for an industry-leading commercial construction company, Graham Construction. I will also say he's a fantastic content writer, and that is the message that he put out on his LinkedIn. But I'm going to give you a peek behind the scenes. Trevor is probably the most interesting man in North America, because if you follow his Instagram feed or his Twitter feed, you'll see that he used to be the editor of Midwest Living and features fantastic communities around the Midwest and around the country. I like to say that I knew him once when we had a chance to work in a class together once, and I think I learned more from him than he ever learned from me. He taught me about communication, about brand building, and a lot more about humor that we'll get into a little bit later. So without further ado, Trevor, good morning. How you doing?
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The other thing that you'll notice right away is he should be hosting this because his radio voice is infinitely better than all of ours. So, Trevor, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about Graham Construction, and maybe help us kick off this conversation specifically about how do we ensure the physical security of our people, to ensure the safety of our people. But first, let's start with a little bit about you and a little bit about Graham Construction.
You bet. Well, I've been with Graham a little over a year now, and prior to that, I worked at Meredith Corporation for about 18 years. So that's kind of where that public company with a big national footprint came into my career, and now I'm glad to be working with a locally owned private company that very different industries there. One is purely on the content side. One is on the physical infrastructure side, and it's been a lot of fun for me to see those two different industries. And what I keep telling people that I've really enjoyed largely about being at Graham is, I've lived for about 20 years now in the Des Moines area. And it's just in the last 14 months or so that I feel like I've gotten to know it better than ever, because I spent so much of my career on an airplane somewhere else. Alluding to, it makes a cool Instagram feed, but it's not the best way to get to know all of your neighbors. So being involved with a local company that serves Iowa and Eastern Nebraska, that's been a blast for me, just to spend more time in the Des Moines business community, getting to know more people here. So Graham, we've been around since 1981. We're a construction management company and general contractor. We serve 4 categories: so commercial, which would be commercial office, light industrial, private education, and about 60% of our business is in healthcare. That's where we got started, and that continues to be a real pillar for us. So that obviously is giving Graham some unique insights into what's going on in handling the pandemic. So when this all started happening, well, we took the obvious first step. You alluded to in your intro, Jeff, that anyone who could started working from home. But obviously the tip of the spear in our business is the teams that are actually out in the field to build things. So it was imperative that we quickly develop ways that not only kept our teams safe in actuality, but also made them feel safe and made our customers feel we were taking the right steps. And you talked in last week's podcast about psychological safety, and the entire time I was listening to that, like that's exactly what we've been looking at too. So there's both sides of it. There's that reality of the steps we're really taking, but it's also, does everyone feel like we're taking the right steps? Do they feel comfortable coming to the job site? Do our customers feel like we're responding to their needs? And that's especially critical when so many of your crews are in healthcare facilities. In construction, also, there's a wide variety of settings that you see your crews in. So a couple of days ago, I dropped in at a job site. We had 2 guys there working alone outdoors. That's a very different situation than 40 people on a job site where you have trade partners who might be in normal times stacked almost physically on top of each other doing their jobs. So coming up with the proper guidelines, we really walked that line between guidance and room for discretion from your field leaders and hearing from them what they recommend in their situation.
I love, Trevor, that you're saying, we talked about psychological safety in our last episode, but that is critically dependent on their perception of physical safety. Tell us, this two people on a job site versus 40 people on a job site. What are you hearing from your workers? What are you hearing from your staff and the home office, and maybe also what are you hearing from clients who've engaged you to build these? Are they demanding certain protections or assurances? Are they less concerned about it since they're sort of outside and can also, have that personal responsibility for physical distancing? What are you hearing in terms of requests?
Sure. So much of that answer, you have to, a safety culture and perception doesn't start today.
Yeah,
that starts years ago. So a lot of my answer, I'm going to kind of unspool the philosophy behind how Graham has built the company and who we hire, because that really goes to how does this happen now over the last 6 weeks or so. Really, I want to talk through the thought process that goes into building those decisions for our business. Well, I'm fortunate to work at a company that has clear core values and has a valid commitment to them. A lot of companies have core values. They live in a drawer somewhere. I talked to a CEO recently who told me that he offered $100 to anyone on his team. He started at a new facility. Anybody who can name the core values will give you $100. And he said in a week of doing that around the building, no one could do it. And he said, including when I was sitting in conference rooms with them printed on the wall. So I am happy to say we have a company that actually you could walk up to any employee and ask them what the 5 core values are and they could quote them. And so that all leads up to being ready for something like this. And our core purpose at Graham is what we build relationships. And then we often add to that, construction is how we happen to do it. So if you're in the business of building relationships, so then every decision gets made with that as the filter. So right alongside that core purpose of building relationships are our core values, one of which is safety, and another one is acting in the customer's best interest. So if you think about like a Star Trek fan, those are prime directives.
Yep.
So if you take the prime directives of build a relationship, be safe, and act in the customer's best interest, well, your decision-making process starts to fall into place quickly because we're not debating whether those are priorities. We know they are, and then we're going to make decisions in line with that. So with those in mind, the next goal then is, well, let's keep business going. As long as it aligns with these prime directives that we've all agreed to all along, that's why we exist. Now we're going to keep business going. Now we're going to keep people employed. So how do we do that? So that's one of the base of that came from. So when you ask, what kind of response we're getting from employees, well, that really goes to you hire the right kind of people. So if you're the kind of guy who wants to wear shorts while you're pouring concrete, you probably weren't working at Graham anyway, right? If you don't like wearing safety glasses, you're not working at Graham anyway, because that's all part of the deal. So when we come in and say we're going to add some additional safety measures to keep you safe from this new challenge, they fall right in line because we live in a culture of that. So that's a hiring story. That's a business philosophy story that we wouldn't have been able to implement what we did. We would have got kickback. And I don't think we've seen that kickback. And another aspect of that goes to our customer reaction that you asked about. We started a COVID task force. This would have been right around March 15th or so. One of our VPs said, I think we need to get this going. And we were very purposeful about assembling that task force. So it's got employees from every discipline in the company on it. It's got people of different seniorities. You've got from VPs down to people who've been in the company 3 or 4 months. You've got field and office. We even have accounting people, marketing, all these different disciplines. And we also invited key trade partners and key customers to be a part of that. So we have about 5 or 6 people who are on that task force who are not Graham employees. And initially we met twice a week via video call. Now we're down to once a week. But that was a critical way for us to be getting that input. We were hearing from every corner of our company and from those outside the company so we could get their perception of, okay, does it seem like Graham's doing the right thing on your facility? And then trade partners, as someone who comes onto our job sites, is it clearly communicated to you what we're trying to do? And what have you heard that we could be adding to our strategy? So I'll pause with all that and see if any questions on that.
Love it. And Jeff would welcome you in here, but I mean, the comment that just screams out to me, a safety culture doesn't start today. As I, prepared for this, looking at Graham's history, the history of celebrating sort of continuous improvement, team values, core values, and safety milestones at every turn, million, hours without time lost due to injury, 2 million hours of working safely. And these have been spanning, 5-10 years before today. A culture of safety doesn't start today. And there's just a ton of research right now coming out that using and leveraging your culture as an asset to meet, the challenges of this crisis period is so important. And unfortunately, if you're behind in investing in your culture, then unfortunately you don't have those strengths to sort of combat these rapidly changing times. Jeff, be happy to welcome you into the conversation, and also want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to post a question in the chat. I see a few folks in the waiting room here. I know Colin Coulter, I'd like to introduce you at some point in the conversation, but, bringing in your perspective and, creating physical and psychological safety from a lab perspective, and thinking about that, and maybe a few other guests if you wanted to chime in. But Jeff, do you want to take us forward from here and maybe get into some of our questions?
Actually, I had a follow-up question on something Trevor just said, and I'll preface this by saying that my younger brother is an environmental geologist who's often out doing cleanup on sites before crews come in. He's in a state on a full lockdown, so he has to carry with him government organization to travel around and serve as a trade partner on some sites. I'm curious if in getting the crews ready to go out during the pandemic, they've also needed any, I'm going to call it public relations training in dealing with outsiders on site. My brother was telling me a story last week. He's often by himself when he's on site because he's the first guy who goes to test the soil and check the water and make sure building and everything can begin. But he said people were walking right up to him to talk to him, and he was like distancing backwards, and people are sort of reacting funny because not everyone is quite aware. In Wisconsin, the social distancing measure is 1 cow. So are you a cow away from me? And that's a cow nose to tail, not a cow side to side.
And that's not a spotted cow. That would be
not a spotted cow.
Different.
Those come at the end of the day. But during the day, you have to keep a Holstein solidly between you. And so he's been trying to figure out, how do you politely tell people you're too close and this is not what you should be doing? And I'm wondering if your crews have run into that and needed any training on also how to communicate politely, you're too close and this is what we're doing and why.
I haven't heard stories about that, but I would imagine it happens. And, I think one of the things that we've been good about, and this goes to the field leaders at Graham, cascading, as we call the message throughout the organization. Our superintendents have daily, they call them toolbox talks. And so they get together every day and just say, let's go over again. Here's what's happening. And we have a safety director at Graham. So he sits in our office in Des Moines, and he's sending that stuff out to arm those superintendents at all times with the messaging. And that goes to all employees, but it's the superintendent's job to make sure everybody lives by that. So I think it's, what I have seen is that the message is so clear that it makes it easy that I don't have to debate with myself whether I'm going to do this or not. It's like, it's been said, this is the regulation. And again, because I know on a Graham job site, if someone sees me without safety glasses, every single person is empowered. One guy calls it, we're all lifeguards in the pool. That if I see somebody breaking a rule, I'm going to go up and nicely say, hey, where's your glasses? You know, that's how we achieve the kind of milestones Matthew is referring to. So I think it's because everybody's doing it, it just becomes natural that now it's not as confrontational because I'm not the only one going around being a safety cop. You know, it's like, hey, we all do this. And it's interesting to me. We had one of our field guys in our office before we all left. We had already started to, this was all happening, you know, in the span of like 24 hours, right? So I was still in the office. We were starting the social distancing, and I'm going down the hallway, and he stops and steps into a side hall to maintain 6 feet. And one of our slogans is safety starts with me. He said, safety starts with me, Trev. So, I mean, it's that thorough. So I think that just starts to take some of the onus out of bringing it up. It's like, hey, we're all doing it. It's nothing personal. We all have our rules. And then there's just communicating with the job sites you're on. That's why it's so important to make sure that the trade partners understand this is going to be the rule. And like some job sites, people have gone to, if you're going to unload a truck, don't get out of your truck. That's fine. Just stay in it. That way we don't even have to deal with any of this. But we've definitely had to issue statements around, hey, this is our position if you've traveled out of state. Nothing personal. This is our position. We actually went to screening trade partners on some of our sites now, especially in healthcare. So we got our field leader trained. So when you walk in the door, he's going to scan you with a thermometer, ask you a series of questions, takes 30 seconds. And then you're cleared to come into the building. So it's got functional reason. And again, goes back to what I said at the beginning, that very much signals to everybody we're serious about this.
Trevor, just knowing that a big percentage of your jobs, your contracts are in the healthcare industry. These are obviously ongoing projects for you and for Graham. And we've been serving and helping a lot of healthcare organizations respond proactively, get the material they need. What does the conversation sound like there? Even so far as we've worked with some individuals who are in the HVAC sector that are, sealing down entire floors because of the circulated air in those facilities, it can be suspect until we have confirmation about how, aerosolized the coronavirus, can travel and how durable it is over the long term. So, as you walk into a healthcare facility, as you're serving healthcare clients, what sorts of things are they talking about? Even ones jobs that you've completed, are they reaching back out to you? Do they need any new services, or tell me where their head's at the moment?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. It's a lot of the latter that you mentioned, where someone will reach out to us who we have a relationship with and say, hey, we've got to create some rooms just like you're talking about. We need to start isolating. And most of that I've heard about was 3-4 weeks ago, early on. It was anticipating the flood that fortunately we haven't seen, to my knowledge, yet in Iowa. So they started creating what we call negative air spaces, which is actually what you're talking about. That just makes sure that the air is moving out of that room and getting filtered. And fortunately, that's something we do a lot of. There's a certification out there called ICRA, which I think is Infection Control and Risk Assessment. We have a lot of our field leaders are certified in ICRA. There's also a certification you can get called the Certified Healthcare Constructor. And we have a bunch of guys certified that. So we've got a lot of expertise in that. And we're also we own some of these negative air machines. So we've had some of our customers contact us and say, do you have any of these that we could rent that you could bring in? Because, and again, I know I keep saying this, but that didn't start the first day. That's something Graham already does, that we guarantee air quality at our facilities, that we consistently show that the air quality inside our construction zone is cleaner than it was before we swung the first hammer. And that's because we create this negative air all the time. So we were very ready to help them with that. So yeah, we've done a bunch of response around that, both in Des Moines and in other cities. We've helped create convert rooms so they'd be ready to have more patient rooms when the time came. We've set up some parking lot tents in case they were needed, and by and large, it seems like those have not hit the utilization they thought they might when we first got started on this process.
Yeah.
But we were there and responding with that and being ready.
And are you, I'd like to bring Colin into the conversation just from a lab perspective here shortly, but Trevor, are you interested, I mean, are you helping serve or able to serve sort of the temporary construction needs for those tent, sites, or is that probably not within Graham's scope?
We haven't done a lot of that. We've done some for existing customers who needed some of that. We've had some conversations with the government about, you look at, in Chicago, I think it was the McCormick Center got converted into clinics, Javits in New York. We've had some conversations around that, but we haven't gone down that road yet because it just really hasn't developed in Iowa, which is good.
Yeah,
but
that's okay.
There's been a lot of conversations around. I've seen entire plans the government has to convert a hotel into a hospital in the span of a week or so. So we looked into some of those things, but again, that hasn't developed here in Iowa.
But it's nice that you're thinking ahead if necessary, and that's part of the culture too. Colin, would love to bring you into the conversation, and Colin, I'll let you introduce yourself very briefly, but maybe talk to us about that physical safety within the lab setting. Sure. I know you are also currently occupying a hotel at the moment, and you could tell us what that looks like as well. But Colin Coulter, take it away.
Sure. So my name is Colin Coulter. I have a bachelor's in molecular biology. I've done testing and analysis work. I've done research in plant pathology, a lot of DNA and proteins and fats and stuff like that. And so now I guess I'll start first with lab safety, and then, well, we can start with the hotel, yes. So I'm in a hotel right now for safety reasons, actually. The Polk County, Iowa got some housing and urban development money for old homes to renovate if they had exposed lead paint and children were living there. So we had children living in the home, and they gave us free money to remediate this paint. So we had to get kicked out and get everybody tested, and everybody was fine, but better safe than sorry. So we're sitting in a hotel for, today's our last day, fingers crossed, and we're heading home. It's been 2 weeks. But just kind of, that's been a test of patience, I think, in terms of safety. It's been stressful, and you never really feel like you were settled in a hotel, so you never really get that psychological relaxation, I think. So that's been a challenge of figuring out how to get everybody, especially the kids, settled in their minds, like help them sleep and things like that. From a lab perspective and safety, I think that it's a lot like construction, where depending on the laboratory setup and depending on what you're working with, these kind of minor lapses in attention can be very, very bad, very critical. So in terms of physical safety, I imagine that it's a lot like construction in that you're making sure your PPP is on all the time. All your PPE is always on. COVID specific, and I know a lot of labs are not as large as the scientists would like them to be. So then you have to start talking about, well, how do we, from an operational perspective, how do we get enough work done to maintain operations? Are we rotating shifts? Are we 6 hours in, 6 hours out? How are we dealing with these small physical spaces? Because at the end of the day, you can't avoid that in a lot of lab settings, being right next to each other. So you really have to figure out some shift scheduling. And
shift scheduling, and Trevor, I'd be really interested. I mean, it is interesting in a lab. And we've worked with some other labs in town. And if there's 8 people in a lab, they've had to rotate shifts. They've had to only have 2 people there instead of having 8 people, kind of on top of each other. Trevor, are there any measures that you're taking in shifting, swap shifting, or those sorts of things, as we, maybe turn the conversation to specific recommendations? What recommendations would you give to either other construction companies that are trying to maintain the safety record that you have, or even, just our general community as they're thinking about re-entry? Trevor?
Well, it's just a full-on commitment. When you say if others wanted to have the kind of safety record that we have, well, it's a full commitment, and there is a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
It takes the right amount of training. It takes the right amount of people. For example, we got everybody in the company is 30-hour OSHA certified, including me, including the person who answers the phone. And that was to make sure everybody understands. And really what I took away from that is exactly what Colin just said, that a minor lapse changes lives. And to get everybody to absorb that importance, we wanted that to be throughout the entire company. So
Trevor, that seems like a message that's pretty important for our entire society at the moment.
It is. And, it's just a matter of story after story. We just saw a guy sent a picture of his cousin fell 6 feet off a ladder because he stood, I think, on the top rung, and he shattered his leg. Oof. And he said, he doesn't work for Graham, just to be clear. He works for somebody else. But it was the Graham guy sent around to everybody. He said, look, this is my cousin. His life is going to be different forever because of this injury to his leg, because he stood on the top rung of a ladder, which we all know we're not supposed to do. So I think we've been talking about this in our own home with this whole COVID thing, as it just keeps getting longer and longer. It's so easy to start letting down and say, after all this time, I haven't gotten it. Nobody really close to me's gotten it. Let's just relax, right? Wouldn't it be nice to go back to doing what we were doing? And I understand that impulse. And I don't envy the people that have to make all these decisions about how do you reopen an economy in a wise way. It's very difficult. But we have to remember, one of our slogans is a close call is a warning. Heed it. If you see a close call, there's even a little pyramid that shows how many close calls eventually escalate into an actual injury. Be very aware of that. So we try, and you just have to renew that almost hourly to say, okay, I'm going to really think about this in a real way. And that's, that's construction, that's labs, that's healthcare, that's any place you're exposed to a risk, like a physical risk.
And Jeff, I think it's really interesting. We were in our planning for this conversation, we were thinking about COVID driving innovation. Some of our clients have done things in 5 weeks that they didn't think they could do in 5 years, working with a distributed workforce, electronic signing of documents. We issued a survey and assessing and surveying the sentiments of people working from home, and one of the top 2 criteria that they that predicted their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with working at home was their office chair and their monitor setup, especially in knowledge worker types of positions. And the only reason they couldn't, the company said they could take the monitors home from the work site, from their headquarters, but they didn't quite realize that all the monitors were also bolted down. So that was the only thing preventing them to get the one thing that would drive higher satisfaction. I guess my question, Trevor, is, as you're walking through this COVID time, as we are playing through COVID and defining our next normal, that will be with us for quite some time, what elements of innovation are you seeing in construction, out on the job sites, as the way that you talk about, Graham, the way you talk about, creating culture through space. What sorts of things are you excited about in terms of innovation?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's the acceleration of some of these digital tools, just like you mentioned, that maybe they were getting dabbled in, but this is, sort of like a space race or a war accelerates innovation in the lab and invention of Velcro or whatever it is we need to make to get this done. We're going to figure it out.
Freeze-dried ice cream.
Exactly. So, we've been seeing things like there's a platform we use called Open Space where you put a 360 camera on a guy's hard hat. He walks through a facility, and we've been using that in multiple ways. So we were just starting to touch it a little bit, and now we're really starting to deploy it. So that in 2 ways. One is a owner can walk through the facility without going to it. And it's very cool. You can actually see the blueprint up in the top right of your screen, and it highlights on the blueprint where you're walking through the video. So you can really get a sense of the place. And then we're also using that. We had a project where it's called a pre-bid walk, where your trade partners need to go into the place and walk through it so they can write a bid on their part. And we couldn't let them into this healthcare facility. So we had a guy walk through and just look at everything in open space, and they were able to submit their bids based on open space. We're also seeing jurisdictions, to my knowledge, we haven't seen it in the Des Moines area yet, but around the country for inspections by governing authorities. So the city building inspector in some places is letting the superintendent walk through the place with his cell phone camera pointed at things. And the inspector said, well, show me that junction box. Okay, now turn it over on the right side. And he can sign off on an inspection without physically going there.
Wow.
So
which would have never been even, no, within the realm of consideration before.
Right, that's a huge step. I've just been reading the last few days about some companies. Actually, I heard a guy out on a golf course talk about this, because a golf course, that's safe, right? You're a lot of room out there. But I heard a guy nearby talking about his company was putting sensors on everyone's hard hat. Actually, this was in a manufacturing facility that tells you if you're too close to somebody else or if you're in a group that's too large. And it starts to ping you to say, hey, you need to separate. So I think you might see some stuff like that. I think the screening that I mentioned where, as someone comes onto a job, they're getting screened for a temperature and questions. And I think someone referred to this last week on your podcast in the retail space, that you might start seeing people doing that in stores. I think we're going to see more of that. It seems like air travel, that might become a part of air travel. That might become a part of sporting events where, now you go through the metal detector and that's slow enough as it is, but now you might have to get a temperature scan before you go into that event. Just little things like, is the handshake going to go away forever? I don't know. Does it or does it not? A shift in thinking that it's not noble to go to work when you feel sick. That's actually, it's not a sign of toughness. It's not a sign of good Midwestern pride. That is putting yourself and others in danger. So if you feel sick, stay home. And that is something I'm hearing trickling back from our field, is that these hardworking, I go at all costs guys are starting to say, you know what, if I feel sick, I'm staying home. And that's okay. There's no shame in that.
And Trevor, these are cultural bedrocks that have been with us for such a long time. The idea that we're all in this together, that we are conscientious, hardworking Midwesterners, and those values have really served us very well. And Trevor, I hate to get too excited about this, but I think about evolution and the social evolution. So how does societies and values evolve over time? Very similarly to biological evolution, where there's this idea of punctuated evolution, that it may not be the slow, steady change that we see, but it's these exogenous shocks that come in and right away change the environment in such a profound way that creates changes in values, like you just said. I mean, when you said it is not noble to go into work when you feel sick, it takes something like a pandemic to shake societies out of that thinking. And that's, that was a value that served us very, very well post World War, that we work at all costs and do those things. But in this next normal, that's not a value that's going to be, shared or celebrated by everyone, because it puts everyone at risk. Jeff, I'd love to bring you into the conversation if you have follow-ups here. I know we were thinking about innovation and thinking about new normal. Jeff?
Yeah, question, Trevor. We have a question from the audience, from the forum. How do you manage community and public perception when people see your workers out on the work site? Has anyone questioned having groups of them out in public working during this crisis?
Perfect question to ask the strategic marketing director. So,
right. Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of negative. I'll swing to a second, a couple positives we've actually heard, but I haven't heard the negative feedback. And I think, again, it's because there's a lot of visible things you can do in construction that show you're being safe. When it comes to PPE, when it comes to, you see guys, like, we don't have our daily meetings inside trailers anymore. Go outside and stay in the parking lot 6 feet apart. So you can actually see guys in these dispersed groups in the parking lot clearly having a meeting. Putting on face masks when that popped up, that, hey, now it's going to be face masks, especially when you leave the contained area of the job site. So if you're at a hospital, when you're going to walk across the parking lot, you need to put on a face mask so you can be clearly seen, protecting that way. When you see screening going on at a doorway, So every time that door opens, there's a guy with a thermometer standing there. It's really evident, not only to the community, but to the employees at the hospital. So that's my segue is, we had one hospital executive in Western Iowa actually tell us, seeing your guys just coming to work is a morale booster for the hospital staff. And the way he put it was, when your guys are there every day, that shows there is a future and we're still building it. And he said, my people need to see something like that. And he said, the other thing is, he said, the way your guys always adhere to safety standards, it actually sets a role model for my team to say, like, even the construction guys are following the rules. You need to follow the rules, okay? Everybody do it the right way. So there actually is some positive, and, I've heard some of our guys say it's really nice to be essential. It's good for them, but it's also, I think, good for the community when you can do it safely, to show there is life still going on out there.
Very nice.
I was going to say, so as we're looking towards the end of this, and one of the elements of this podcast, Trevor, if we approach 45 minutes, we think it's a meeting. And I don't know about you, but I've got a few drinks here. It's coffee and water. These are sort of thoughtful conversations, but we don't want to run the risk of it feeling like a meeting. As we have drinks in front of us, I think the most famous sort of game to play during our Zoom conversations is whenever anybody says new normal, whenever anybody says pandemic or unprecedented or everything has changed, we all have to take a drink. So
you're on mute. Take a drink.
Trevor, pull out your crystal ball, whether it's for Graham, thinking about the next normal for Graham Construction, thinking about how this changes the way you do business, built on the foundations of safety and team and quality that Graham has. But as you think about new markets, new projects, what does this new normal look like for you, and what does it look like for Graham?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people are trying to anticipate is, what does commercial office look like? I was just part of a commercial real estate forum here a few days ago that the Des Moines Business Record put on. I'll give them a plug. They're doing a great job with a lot of their forums. Join those if you get the chance.
So good.
You'll learn a lot. One of the things that was being discussed there is just all permutations of what commercial office looks like. So as companies that might have resisted work from home, do they realize, hey, it actually worked out okay, we need to make that more of a policy? On the flip side, there were maybe a lot of people who were wishing they could work at home who are now saying, you know what, I am ready to go back. I've been hearing that from some people too, or the hybrid version of that. Colin says, let me out of the hotel, please. Or is it a hybrid where, people ask me, what do you think from working from home? Like, I kind of like it until about 10:30 every day. And then I'm just ready to go out and see people and do stuff, right? I like a little bit of it in the morning. I don't mind not driving to work first thing, but a hybrid would be nice. So I think you might see some of that. Do commercial offices, does this depress demand for commercial office space as more people work from home? Does it increase demand because offices have to be more spread out now? So do we see a return to individual offices? Do we see a return to bigger conference rooms? Do you see changes in terms of, I was listening to an interior designer talk about surfaces in offices. So the idea of a fabric panel on your cubicle, well, that doesn't seem very sanitizable. Is that a word? Very clean, right? So do we go to more hard, shiny surfaces so that it's A, easier to clean, and B, looks clean? So I can at least see that clearly a hard surface must not harbor disease like a fabric wall panel would. So you might see some of that. I think, logistics could be just a huge deal. You guys are all the experts in supply chain, not me, but it seems like we would see supply chain potentially get more domesticated again. And as, everybody was already shopping online, but as that accelerated to a new level, and you look at things like the Amazon Center being built in Altoona, these distribution centers that they need a lot of them because they need them to be close to the people so they can have quick shipping. They need them to be close to rail lines. They need them to be close to interstates. There's a lot about Iowa that's good for that, and especially central Iowa. So I think there might be some growth in that. And then every time you put something like an Amazon, there's got to be this ecosystem around it. Who is supplying that? We were talking to one international manufacturer that's getting ready to build a new facility in Iowa, and their site is something like 40 acres. I think they're going to occupy about 15 of it. The rest is a logistics campus of suppliers that's going to go around their facility. And then I've been hearing discussion this week about an emphasis on the refrigerated supply chain specifically, as online grocery shopping now has become something we're used to and continues. You've got to keep food cool. So what does that mean in terms of a refrigerated supply chain? So that's a big kind of random list, but those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
And I loved what you said, the expectations of flexible and mobile workforce, distributed workforces, that maybe, inviting hybridization into, standard work schedules. I have seen this, will it increase demand for real estate or will it decrease demand? Trevor, as I think about our community, in Iowa that has so many of the attractive benefits of urban life, and yet also not the density that we see in other urban centers. I fundamentally believe this could be an offensive element for our community as we think about, marketing to high density urban centers that Des Moines offers probably one of the best qualities of life in the United States. And we've already seen an uptick in inquiries. Hey, you know what? I just don't want to live in New York City anymore. I have access to things, but I can do this from anywhere in the world, and Des Moines looks pretty attractive from that standpoint. So from that perspective, I think it's nice to think about Graham reaping the benefits of some of those reconsiderations of people, on the East Coast, West Coast, reconsidering here. And then lastly, I loved what you said about diversifying your supply chain. The leading edge of this crisis, I think, was a supply chain disruption in Asia, and we experienced it here in the United States as, man, we really need to find other places to source steel, to source assembled components, and some of the leading indicators of the impacts here were supporting clients as they diversified their supply chains, and unfortunately many times they just didn't have any other options, even in generic drugs, and it takes a while to build up the capacity to supply some of those things domestically. So, this exogenous shock, this COVID pandemic, is going to plant the seeds for our new and next normal for many, many years. And that from a business perspective, from a social observer perspective, for us sitting here in this salon, it's fascinating to see, but there's going to be a lot of pain to go along with it. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you, and then maybe Trevor for some concluding comments.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're just about at the end of our time. So Trevor, I'll let you give us any bits of wisdom that you would like here before we risk becoming a meeting, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Well, I would just say, in a positive note, I'm so excited about what I have seen out of our company, out of Iowans in general over the last 6 weeks. The innovation, the willingness to pivot, the willingness to collaborate with other people and get together and just say, what are you seeing? What can we do together? And, it shows, and I said this at the beginning, it shows when you've hired the right people or surrounded yourself by the right people, that is paying off in spades now over the last few weeks. And I think it seems to me Iowa's done a great job. And I'd say in general, we've got some challenges too, but you look at what's going on in the rest of the country and places. I've been really proud of Iowa and our business community specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trevor, I'm going to ask, just get one more question in. Trevor, for those of you who are listening, Trevor also is not only a marketing expert, but is a relationship builder, as he says, and takes care of those around him. I dare say that he shares the identity as a pilgrim in this life, and is probably one of the best counselors and coaches and role models for all of us. But Trevor, as you sort of think, even with your Graham hat, but also with your, personal heart as you reach out to people, What advice are you giving to folks that are affected by this, that do have to face the daily stress beyond 10:30, that we still got 8 hours left in the day? How are you counseling them and encouraging them to draw upon that reservoir to make it through?
Yeah, I think it's, that's a deep question. We could add another 45 minutes just on that. But, I think it's it's showing us what we value. And I think it has opened a lot of people's eyes to parts of our culture that some of us were sort of railing against for a long time that weren't sustainable or weren't profitable for us. And I don't mean in money terms. And I think that's revealed some of that. Now, I don't say that insensitively, because if you've lost your job, that's a real problem. I'm not saying it's not. That's a real challenge, and that's hard. But for those of us who aren't quite in that position yet, maybe we've just been inconvenienced, or maybe we're just nervous. You got to think about, well, what is it that you value about what you do? What is it you value about your lifestyle? And as the reset comes, whatever that is, how hard of a reset, how soft of a reset, we don't know. Just be very purposeful about what you add back in to the mix. And as you think about where are you trying to go. And I think this could be a chance for a lot of people to reevaluate what's important to them. And, again, I'm not saying that lightly for the people who are being forced into difficult situations. I'm saying it for those of us who might have a chance to make some choices in a situation like this. Think wisely about that choice.
Trevor, thank you. That is exactly, I think, the wisdom and counsel that we all need. How do you, we've had a chance to wipe the slate clean, and as you say, be very purposeful and intentional about what we choose to add back onto our plate. Trevor Meers, consummate pilgrim, adventurer, and most interesting man in America, if not Iowa. Thank you very much. Jeff?
Yes, thank you again, Trevor, for joining us this morning, and for everyone who listened in live to this Baton Sâlon podcast. It'll be on our website if you liked what you heard, www.batonglobal.com, and available wherever you get your favorite apps. If you have an idea you'd like us to address on a future Friday, please drop us a note. Agile supply chains is on the list, so that topic will be coming back around here in a few weeks. And feel free to follow us on social media to find out when that will be. In the meantime, stay safe, have a great weekend, and remember, calm is contagious. Goodbye.